Torej, dobro večer in dobrodošli na predavanju z naslovom Samo zato, ker je v načrtu, še ne pomeni, da je pravično. Moje ime je Marko Peterlin, prihajam z Inštituta za politike prostora IPOP in to predavanje je prvo v nizu, ki jih organiziramo v okviru podnebnega programa Mreže za prostor, ki ga financirata Ministrstvo za okolje, podnebne energije in Ekosklad in je namenjeno v prvi vrsti ozaveščanju o dobrih praksah prilagajanja na podnebne spremembe. Zdaj, tokrat bo zgodba majčkeno obrnjena na nek način, ker se bomo najprej seznanili z nekaterimi slabimi praksami, pri katerih se nekako javno dobro in tudi podnebno odporne rešitve podrejajo nekim zasebnim koristim, ampak v nadaljevanju bomo slišali tudi, kako se pa nekatere skupnosti uspešno upirajo takim slabim praksam in tudi seveda z vidika prilagajanja na podnebne spremembe. Današnja predavateljica je aktivistka in doktorska raziskovalka Sonja Dragović. Sonja sicer prihaja iz nam razmeroma bližnjega okolja, iz Črne Gore, ampak že več let živi in dela v Lizboni, na Portugalskem, kjer je doktorska raziskovalka na univerzi, ki je jaz ne znam izgovoriti.
University Institute of Lisbon, ISCTE.
Okay.
Univerzitetski institut v Lizbonu.
Na Oddelku za arhitekturo in urbanizem in kot štipendistka Portugalske fundacije za znanost in tehnologijo. Z ozadjem iz ekonomije in urbanih študij ter z dolgoletnimi aktivističnimi izkušnjami se njene raziskave osredotočajo na kritično analizo urbane politike in prakse, prostorsko pravičnost ter vlogo družbenih gibanj, aktivističnih kolektivov in angažiranih arhitekturnih praks pri oblikovanju urbanega prostora. Današnji dogodek je tudi neke vrste neuradna otvoritev našega novega prostora za dogodke, ki smo ga poimenovali Rastlinjak. Gre za nek neprofitni prostor, ki je na voljo tudi za najem in s prihodki katerega želimo na dolgi rok spodbujati rast skupnosti in neprofitnega sektorja pri prilagajanju na podnebne in družbene spremembe. Upamo, da vam bo všeč. Zdaj pa, Sonja, beseda je tvoja. Now we switch to English. Yes,
Thank you so much, Marko. Thank you so much. Also, I understood most of that, so actually I should give Slovenian a chance, I think. Yeah. So maybe in the future. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming, everyone, and especially thank you to IPOP crew for inviting me. Marko and I were just talking about how long we've known each other from these regional networks where we're trying to better understand what's happening with our spaces and what to do about it. I tend to speak a tad too fast, so if that happens, warn me, but I'll try to keep it, conversational and understandable. About today's lecture, I think we should just go straight into it. I want to tell you about certain mechanisms through which some things that are happening in space are portrayed as something that is inevitable and natural and necessary. Well, it most certainly isn't. And I will be telling you about this through a series of examples. My doctoral research is focusing mostly on Croatia and Portugal, but because I'm an activist in Montenegro for a long time, and with Kana, ko ako ne arhitekt, and Zeleni Kolašin, which is where I am in Montenegro, I have also a lot of experience of dealing with things such as poor urban plans, decision makers who are hostile and don't want to listen, public who is worried but doesn't really understand how to act within these structures and within these networks. So all of that somehow I tried to structure within this lecture, and I hope that you will find it interesting, and I will be most grateful for questions and feedback at the end. So, without further ado, at the very beginning, just as a quick framing, I'd like to say that for this, we're going to look at the political and economic framework of spatial planning. And although I made this in a way in which does not require you to know a lot about this, I'll try to actually extrapolate everything we want to say from these several examples. But basically, let's see where this thing, the plan, the spatial plan, the urban plan comes from, and whom it serves, and how it becomes something that we just accept as a common sense, even though it shouldn't be. Like, spatial planning is not gravitation. It's not something that we cannot do anything about. But how and why it's so difficult, this is something that the lecturer will try to unpack. So what spatial planning really does, I wanted to illustrate through this picture So this is, yeah, if we can do that. Yeah, excellent. So, excellent. This is a photo I took in Kolašin in northern Montenegro last summer. And you can see there is some like a semblance of a project about to be made. And these are some small bungalows. As you can see, they are actually really, really tiny. But they're also super expensive. And you see that whoever is building them and promoting them says that guaranteed income is 24%, by which they want to say, if you invest here, if you buy this, we can pretty much guarantee that you're going to have a good return on your investment. You can also see that this is placed underneath this huge swath of forest. And nothing was built here before. And until very recently, even though certain urban plan existed for this area, no one was building anything there. At one point, which we will discuss later in the presentation, certain conditions have been created for this to become something that makes sense and something that's profitable. So it's just basically certain planning, economic and political conditions converged. And this is why it's important to understand that planning is not neutral, is not innocent, and is made to serve certain interests. And in this case, it's not the interests of people whose cows used to roam this area, but in the interests of people who have a lot of money that they can invest and then gleefully accept 24% return on investment. But to keep it more structured, here are some points. So planning creates value on paper. The land that used to be not intended for building, that was agricultural land or protected land, becomes buildable. Or if even some construction was allowed there before, it becomes something where more construction is encouraged. And this increases the value of this land. This value then exists on paper, but it does not go to general public most often. It is actually most of it captured by private investors. This is how, in the systems that we inhabit, this is how this normally works. At the same time, the cost of building infrastructure to make this possible, or the risk, if something happens, mostly falls to the public. This is just how the system is designed. Because you make a plan, you make it favorable for private parcels of land, and everything that needs to be done in order to equip this land for usage is still the responsibility of public budgets, which means all of us who give our money to taxes to make this possible. And this doesn't happen by accident. It results from political decisions, and it follows a certain pattern. So this is not how this has to be. This is just how this is within the current political and economic system that we inhabit. And this is the pattern that I have been using, and I want to kind of use it also to go through certain case studies with you tonight. So the 3 steps would be to make something legitimate, then legal, and then inevitable. What do we mean? By legitimate, it means that even before the plan becomes a reality or some other legal instrument becomes a reality, first there is this narrative that this is how things should be. And these narratives can sound different, but they actually all have the same goal in mind. One of these narratives in the spaces of former Yugoslavia for the last more than 3 decades have been, it's better if it's private. We should privatize. And then we should make something nice. And what is not nice is a factory, for example. What is not nice is some sort of conservation. What is nice is consumption spaces, shopping malls, luxury real estate, etc. And these narratives come from the positions of power. So are promoted by politics and by economic system that kind of has used to extract from this. Other than promises of beautiful new spaces, like shopping malls, for example, there is also an inevitable promise of jobs. And this is especially relevant for this period after 2008. After the economic crisis, after the economic crisis of 2008, we've been through several other crises, COVID and everything. So there is always a possible solution, and this solution is somehow portrayed, let's use this space to create what we need, to create jobs, to create beautiful things that are somehow end up being private. Also, another big narrative is revitalization. And this carries with it other projects like green city, smart city, let's reuse the heritage in some other way, and let's always do this in a way that, you know, involves private capital in some way, and then we'll figure it out. It's going to be great. So this is the first layer. And then the next step is legal. How to change the rules in order to make this possible. And this sometimes looks like a new law, sometimes it looks like a new spatial plan, sometimes it looks like a new rule. And I have never researched Slovenian context, but you probably can already think of things like this. But in Belgrade, for example, which is a very famous case, you know, all over the Balkans, we had Belgrade waterfront, for which a whole lex specialis was made, unlike anything that was in force in Serbia up to that point, just to make a very special circumstances for this investor and for this location, so that a lot of value can be extracted for private gain. And also, this often looks like concessions or public-private partnerships. You know, these concessions where someone is given to use some sort of a resort for 100 years. For example, in Montenegro, we had Sveti Stefan, a really beautiful, picturesque peninsula, wonderful place, super famous during the times of Yugoslavia, that was given under a concession for 99 years. And for these 99 years, new user is practically owner. Like as the colleagues from Croatia said in the case of Muzil in Pula, you know, 66 years or 99 years is just a different way to spell forever, because it's never going to be in a different regime of use for all the time that we're going to see and live. Public-private partnerships, absolutely as well. Regime of use and regime of giving certain benefits to the to the private partner, where private partner is usually entitled to have a lot of use from public resources, while usually public retains the risk. If something goes wrong, we get the bill. So this is also why this is a very, for now, like famous system of extracting value. In the end, so what we have this narrative, it's going to be great, you're going to get jobs. Then we get the plan, we get the law, and then something starts. It starts being built, or some forest is being torn down, or they start mining something's happening. And the people, when they see that something's happening, and you probably, if you're in an activist scene, you have probably already experienced this, something starts and people are like, oh no, we don't want this, what's happening? But at that time, the decision maker is like, no, this is inevitable. It's legalized, it's in the law, it's in the plan, investors have rights. And if we do something about it now, we are going to be penalized, can't break the rules, where have you been in the previous phases? And also, finally, that the city now depends on this, because the finances are tied up with actually doing and putting through and enforcing this plan to the end. So even if you don't like it, even if it's going to ruin your block, your city, your way of life, sorry, where have you been during the previous phases? While at the same time, keeping previous phases, the first one as something completely natural, and the second one as something very opaque. Like, you know, who are you to participate in making a law? What do you know about spatial planning? Leave it to the experts, etc., etc. And through this mechanism, through these steps, we actually get to have plans that are doing what we don't need and what we don't want, but we feel tied up in them and we can't do anything about it. I also just wanted to kind of show this slide because there are particularities to post-socialist cities. Of course, in literature, there is now already, because we live in 2025, there has been a lot of talk about the usefulness of the term post-socialist. But actually, there are patterns of developments and behaviors and the policy development in post-socialist city that still diverge from other European regions. And this is just to look at, just from looking at these theses, we can immediately think about how certain urban spaces were changed from industrial to cultural and touristic use, and how this is primarily their use now. And this is also where the money goes in order to try to make more money, which is inextricable from space. Next, appropriation and revalorization, which basically means privatization. What used to be social property in times of Yugoslavia is no social property anymore. First it was transferred to state or the city, then it was privatized, which is a way of, again, taking it away from public hands. Financialization of housing, I hear you pay a lot for rent in Ljubljana. We pay also ridiculous amounts in Lisbon. This has been a problem now everywhere in Europe, but this is also the part of the mechanism of extracting the value. And of course, new meanings and governance. All sorts of planning strategies where it becomes completely acceptable to push away from the city and push away from developments people who are not worthy, who are not creative enough, not skillful enough, not rich enough, not pretty enough, to kind of push them away and then redo, remodel the cities so that it can be in line with these new and new rich tastes. So this is something that we can actually map across post-socialist space, and I'm sure many examples could be found in Ljubljana and in other Slovenian cities as well. So just something to have in mind. But we're not going to go into more details related to theoretical part right now because I didn't want to torture you with that. We're going to go into examples, and then we're going to draw some conclusions. So first example, and you might know about this because also it's close to us, right, in the Balkans, and it's been going on for so long. But I think it's an amazing case study of how terrible the policy can be and also how amazing activists can be. So I really love this example, and I'm happy to have enough material to share with you now. And again, hopefully it's known to you already. So this is a very meme-like illustration. This is illustration that I took from the movement, but it shows really well how huge this development, proposed development was and what its potential impact could be. So you see circled in black is actually the old town of Dubrovnik. This is UNESCO recognized and protected old town of Dubrovnik, famously. And then this hill above Dubrovnik is Srđ, and it is empty. It is beautifully empty. There is nothing there. There is nature there. Like nothing man-made. It's nature. It's a really wonderful ecosystem, and it has not been urbanized. And then there was this idea, not only to actually use it and urbanize it, but to actually use it as a golf resort. So, to be able to kind of follow faster and easier, there are notes. This is that's what's at stake, what you saw in the illustration. And then what is actually that they're saying, what the decision makers are saying they want to do, but what is actually happening there. Initially, this was planned as a golf park. It was a proposition, let's make this into a wonderful new location for world golfers. It's going to be amazing. As you know, the narrative is this is going to be a new development opportunity for us. And it was also at the very early stages, more than 20 years ago, it was zoned in the urban plan as sports and recreation. So somehow it can fit. Sports, recreation, golf is going to be fine. Then, over the next decade, it just grew and grew. So through successive plans at the local level and at the regional level, it grew to more than 300 hectares of luxury real estate development. So it's one thing. And of course, I'm a huge hater of golf. We can talk about that in the discussion. I really despise golf. But even if there was some sort of idea, oh, it's nice, it's grass, let's play some golf. This is not about golf. This is about 268 villas and 1,600 apartments. So activists from Dubrovnik saw through it really fast and really soon after any of this was announced and said, this is apartmanization, as they say, apartmanizacija. They're just using this excuse of golf to actually destroy this by building all this real estate. And of course, it would not be a real estate where we could live. Nobody would be invited to live there. It's a luxury, prestigious commodity for the world elite that goes and plays golf. Ridiculous. But what was then the idea? Who would benefit from this? And this is the first time that I'm underlying this term regulatory rent, because I'm not sure it's widely known what it means, but it's actually super simple. Regulatory rent is precisely what we talked about just 5 minutes ago. When there is a piece of land that is not worth very much because there is no plan to build anything there. And then once when you regulate it and when you impose a plan and suddenly somewhere where it was just like a grass, you can finally now build an apartment building or a luxury villa, it is much more It just worth much more. It's worth much more. So in this case, the project value increased from around 80 million euros to 900 million euros, just because of all these plans that are being focusing on these real estate development. And of course, public was signing off on infrastructure. So when you look at the land, about 25% of the land that we saw up there is public land, but only about 18% would be open to public use, because everything else would be villas, and what are you going to do in the villa that you can't afford? While at the same time providing water, providing electricity, providing everything else that's necessary for activities to actually occur there. And basically, when this emerged, plan from one side and opposition of civic actors from the other side, it became clear that who is fighting for what and whose vision of the city is what. On one side, you had public regulators who were saying, this is amazing, we're going to be a global destination, you're going to get to have new jobs. And on the other side, activists were saying, no, we are not accepting this because this is not how we want to use the city, and this city is not going actually to be available for us to use if this is what we do. So already through that story, we can identify legitimate, legal, and inevitable. Legitimate was this: new jobs, revitalization, unused land, let's use it, let's do something with it. Legal, throughout last 25 years, plans were always changing, and they were changing in a way that favored this golf and real estate development. Also, because this process was so long, they were doing other things that were murky and opaque, and actually were trying to present the project as something that it wasn't, especially with environmental impact assessments, where they were not assessing the whole project, but just bits by bits, parts and parts, and separated. These projects maybe could be stretched to look okay-ish, but if you put it all together, if you say this is all happening in the same area, it cannot be justified environmentally. But this is another trick. This is another legal trick. And also, this commitment to build infrastructure with public money, selling of public land, privileged sellings of public land. The selling was not, oh, we're selling some public land, so whoever bids can just come and buy it. It was actually kept secretive, and it was fixed for certain buyers. And in the end, when the fight got going, of course, there was this very well-known, investors will leave, investors will sue us, we're going to get bankrupt, what are you doing? We have to go through with these plans. So like the whole repertoire was there. And then one amazing thing about this is that the resistance was so fierce, and people were resisting this plan and this project for 17 years before, spoiler alert, they won. They won. This is not happening. So what they did, so activists in Dubrovnik were just whole network of people who were in culture, arts, who were ecological activists, and who were articulating all of this for years. And then they started getting together with other activists from other parts of Croatia. Because during this time, and this is like the middle of 2010s, this is the time of Varšavska struggles in Zagreb. This is the time of Forum za prostor, which was a pan-Croatian network of activists and people who were actually really interested in finding ways to fight for common use of space, while at the same time, whole legal framework in Croatia was being designed to privilege investors. They had at the time, I think unique in the world, golf course law, according to which like golf was a privileged activity, and if you wanted to develop golf, you could basically do whatever. It is truly ridiculous. It was enforced for several years. Then organizations Green Action, Zelena akcija, and Right to the City, Pravo na grad, some of you might know them, but they have been very, very involved, and also things that they learned from their other struggles in Zagreb, they sort of transferred those skills and then started collaborating all together. In this sense, it was very important that Green Action was made up of lawyers, basically, which is a shout out to any possible lawyers in the room. You are very much appreciated and valuable for this, because we sometimes need to go to courts. And their expertise in this, plus, for example, architects associations. At this time, local chapters of Croatian Architects Association started seeing how important it is to use expertise and to explain publicly and to actually go to the media, go to the courts where necessary and say what we just said before. This is apartmanization. This is privileging of money over public use, and we should not let this happen. So this is what I call here counter-expertise, basically being able to use what you know in order to stand with the activists against these mainstream narratives, which proved very valuable for this campaign. At one point in 2013, when everything else seemed to be not working and they lost some lawsuits and the fight was going on for a long time, they actually managed to organize a referendum, which was the first referendum of this kind, local referendum in Croatia. And it was an amazing success because there was no other election on that day. It wasn't like a local election or mayoral or anything. People were asked to go to polls only to vote on this. Basically, should Srđ be privatized in this way or not? And even with that, so 32% of all registered voters came out and voted, even though they were told by the mayor, don't go, even though like the city of Dubrovnik organized like excursions for retired people on that day to take them out of Dubrovnik so they wouldn't vote. Like these strategies, it's really, really something to behold. Also, during all this time, the investors into this whole project created new media in Dubrovnik local landscape to just use them as front to feed propaganda to the public, to talk about how amazing this is going to be. Also, they hired, and this is not in the slides, but it's also interesting if there are architects among you and if you know Zaha Hadid studio, very, very famous, very problematic, deeply problematic, but very famous, star architecture kind of approach. They actually hired the studio to kind of give them prototypes of these villas that are going to be above Srđ, and then also fed this to the public saying like, famous global architects are making these houses and you dare to protest? You should be ashamed. And things like this. So this has been going on for years. Still people did this referendum because it stayed below 50% threshold. Even though people who came out, 80% of people who came out voted no, that they don't want this project, that they don't want space to be used in this way, but it was not recognized as valid because of these only 32%. But because of all this organizing and because local election was just around the corner from the referendum, people in these organizing said, you know what, we're going to go to municipality. And they actually entered the election and they won 3 seats in a local municipality. And this was the first time that they entered. And at the time they were like an independent list from 2013. And in 2019 they actually formed a party, Srđ je grad, Srđ is the city. And later on they started collaborating with Možemo, and they're still a very present and important vocal left-green option in the local parliament. So basically they got, there are some of the court wins, some of the permits were annulled. Then after these permits were annulled, there was, of course, investor is going to sue. Investor actually sued. There was arbitration in Washington. And only last year, finally, arbitration in Washington concluded that actually investor has no rights. And it's also interesting, and this is not easy to find in the mainstream media, but it is amazing that probably one of the big reasons why this arbitration was concluded in favor of Croatian state, that is, of the space, of the people who were protesting, was because Green Action and the lawyers from Green Action actually petitioned the court to listen to their side. They used the institute, something that's called in Latin, friend of the court. And then they told them, okay, if you can write it in 30 pages, we'll put it in the material. And they also did not let them see all the materials, but they just wrote from their experience explaining how in all of these previous court battles, the state and the courts were actually on the side of the investor. And actually, investor was not hurt in any way, and investors should not gain any further rights. And this is, so we can't know, because it's not open to the public, all the files from these proceedings, but we can make a very educated guess that this was also important. And this was completely related with the struggle and with the materials that all of these, and analysis that all of these people were producing together in order to fight for this. So that would be about Dubrovnik. Let me see. We're good. So now I'll talk about Montenegro a little bit. So this is one ridiculous detailed urban plan from Podgorica. And as you can see, it is old, it is poorly made, and don't try to read the whole legend. But why I put this illustration here is to show you the color pink. Everything that's pink is for-profit housing in this plan. You can see that almost everything is pink. Yes. So when we only have for-profit housing, what don't we have? We don't have greenery. We don't have kindergartens. We don't have hospitals. We don't have schools. We don't have anything else. And this is quite close to Podgorica city center. And it's a plan that was made in 2005 and amended in 2009. So at the time, there was also a decision to amend the plan in 2009 and to have these amendments valid for 5 years. So if we were lucky, this plan would go out of force a bit more than 10 years ago. However, it stayed in force and nobody disputed it. So it's just something that keeps being within the documentation that is still valid in Montenegro, and people can still make constructions according to this plan. There is a very complicated legal reason for this. If there are any legal nerds later, ask me about it, but for now I'm gonna skip it. Anyway, it's still in use. And so it has this expressly residential character, and as you could see in that map, 82% of the plan is just housing for profit, market housing. So basically, this means that the plan maximizes number of apartments that can be built on private plots for sale, and it just forgoes everything else. So other parts of this plan is, so this is basically written out what I already said, but just to make sure that we know what this means. So more floors, less space in between the buildings. And this is, of course, something that privileges landowners, because this land is now private land, and whoever owns it can build more and can get more money out of it, which is, again, value created on paper, which is regulatory rent that we mentioned before. Buildings are closer together, green spaces are basically non-existent, local infrastructure is completely overloaded, and also in the plan it is written, we're basically creating residential area here, residents can go somewhere else to do their thing. I mean, this is like now a bit colloquial, but really, it's like you go somewhere else if you need to send your kids to school, if you need to do your shopping, like just don't do it here. And this is really what has happened, what has materialized there. And so it's basically, to walk from here to the central square in Podgorica is only 20 minutes to walk. So it's a very central area. But basically, it's not a place to live. And it's not, and while also it is important to note that this is a very, something that is illustrative of how detailed urban planning has been working in Podgorica for the last several decades. Because our city is basically just attaching new blocks of buildings on the infrastructure that was built during the times of Yugoslavia. We have it's very, very, very little that has been built in terms, for example, of health protection. Some new schools in recent times, but like in terms of health services, in terms of cultural centers, very, very little since the breakup of Yugoslavia. This is what this looks like. So it's, you see, like it is very, very, you see where the new building plot is. So, and actually, when they started building this building, the people who already are inhabiting these other buildings, their unhappiness with all this started erupting. And of course, we were already where in the process? It's inevitable. Machines are already there. What do you want us to do now? And in terms of that narrative, let's just look at it. So when the plan was made, it was like, okay, we make this for 5 years and then we'll redo it later and we need more housing anyway. Podgorica is a growing city and this is a nice place, so let's just make housing. This was the narrative at the time. And then at the time also it was said that this plan is aligned with the higher plans that also say that we need to build more housing because the city is growing. And also, even though it's a really, really bad layout, it can still be defended at some level as like, because, you know, in expertise, when it comes to planning, there are stark defenders of density. But there's one thing to have density. It's another thing to live in panopticon. So, and this is more to the later. And also, public hearings at the time were, of course, organized, but it is very telling that, and you know this from your practice as well, more public attention to public debates and hearings about plans. This is something that started being politicized only recently. You know, in 2009, it wasn't really, there were no structures that would encourage people to go to these debates. And the people and the institutions making plans, they would only try maybe to inform the owners of the land. So owners of the land come, and usually when owners of the land come to public debates, they want to build more. So they don't say, oh, please, we shouldn't build a school here. They say, please give me more square meters so I can make more money. And in the end, official response was the plan is adopted. And when the officials were told, and the mayor at the time, he said like, well, what can I do? That's an old plan. And you know, like, it's okay if it's bad, what can I do about it? And also, it's amazing how they always say, where were you when we had a public debate about this plan? Which is very, very, I think, sneaky and a tiny bit evil way of treating this, especially because when you actually had the original plan and when you were debating it, you were even then privileging the interests of the investors. Because and this is also one of the ways, and probably, you know, this is I think it's happening maybe in your context as well, where the decision makers are trying to push the responsibility for bad decisions onto the public and say, look, nobody protested. Nobody protested, which means it's fine. No, nobody protested because they didn't know they need to protest. And it is your responsibility to actually make sure we all have good living environment. Also, another thing is that when they say, oh, people who came for public debate, they just said this is good. They said they're happy. Yes, because they're owners of the land. For them, it's good. They're not going to live there. And then someone comes, and for example, some of the people who now live in these buildings bought apartments there like 5 years ago. Just got married, bought an apartment, have young kids, they have nowhere to play, they didn't know what they were getting themselves into, they didn't know that they should read the urban plans, and nobody in the structures is protecting them, because they're actually just protecting interests of the capital through these 3 steps. This is also a showcase for some of the things that we have been doing as activists. So the photo you saw before, when this started happening and the machines came, people who live around there then wrote to us. At this time, this was 2010, and our organization was already active for 5 years, writing publicly a lot about the evils of investor urbanism and wanting to do things differently. So people wrote to us via Facebook and they explained what was happening. So we said, okay, let's take this up, let's look at this. And one of the things that we did is we did a questionnaire that was filled in by around 250 people living in the neighborhood. And they expressed that they are really, really unhappy with the quality of public spaces and public services, which was not surprising. Another thing, when we went and spent some time in this neighborhood, we saw that actually, even though the plan is ridiculous, buildings built there are even more ridiculous. Like, this doesn't add up. So we went and saw the bad plan, and we saw that basically most of the buildings in the plan were planned to have like 6 or 7 stories high. But actually the buildings we saw there had like 8 or 9 or 10. We're like, okay, this is not right. So then basically we made an elaborate, we just randomly selected 10 buildings and we showed this is what says in the plan, and this is how we can see that this is, for example, 3 stories higher than it should be. And then, because people already were making protests about this, we sent this to the media, we sent this to the ministry, we sent this to the capital city. And then they were like, oh, we didn't know this was happening. Like, they knew it was happening, but there was no public attention paid to it. So then, because also local election was coming up, they wanted to make a gesture. And they did make a gesture by actually revoking a license of one of the reviewers of this plan, who then, this old guy, said, like, oh, everybody does that. Why are you penalizing me? He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But anyway, we created a lot of buzz around this. And this is also where media attention was also very important. So by this, and this is like, take note of the repertoire of actions. By this time, our organization is already active for 5 years. We know the journalists. Journalists know that we make sense. We don't lie to them. We give them good analysis. We say this is a problem. Pressure, here is some material. Can you pressure the government? And all of this resulted in actually, amazingly, mayor deciding to actually do something about that building site that you saw before, and actually to try to make an arrangement with the investor to give them another plot somewhere else and to actually take this plot into public ownership and do something for the community for it. This is also why it's important to remember, as we know, if you ever dabbled in local politics, time before the election is a magical time. It's more magical than Christmas. Like, you can do stuff. So always, like, whenever election year is around the corner, count with that. In the end, this is what we managed to do. So this is from the time when they were trying to make the building, and this is where we actually managed to stop that, and then the park was made. And in the end, we weren't super happy because the procedure for the park was not very participatory. They just came and was like, here's the park. But still, it's much better than to have another building there. And of course, all of this that you can see on the sides in this plan, all of it is for construction. And I think in the meantime, more buildings were built there. But important thing is that during that time, we managed to actually even persuade authorities to put the whole plan out of force and to actually start working on a different plan. And this hiatus held for 4 years. But then owners of the plots complained to the Constitutional Court that the city of Podgorica did not have right to actually revoke the plan. And last year, the plan was reinstated, and now they're building again, and now we're mounting another attempt. So this is also why we call this a zombie plan, because it keeps coming back from the grave to haunt us. But it's also, I wanted to show this example, and this is also an example that Matis didn't see before, because we talked about this stuff before. But I wanted to show it because it doesn't have to be huge, internationally promoted, Zaha Hadid adjacent project that's amazing somewhere in the Adriatic coast. This is a very unassuming neighborhood in Podgorica, but it's planned in this way exactly because it privileges private over public interest on the level of čestica, on the level of urban plot that's privately owned. And I have one more case, and this is my hometown. So this is also that photo I showed you at the very beginning. And it is a very interesting case because it really shows how no matter where, it is interesting because it doesn't matter where the space under development is. If certain programs and policies and economic incentives are provided, everything can be made into a very prestigious commodity, which means everything can be redeveloped into something that cannot be good or used by the community. So Kolašin is a very small place, and it has around 3,000 inhabitants in its urban part. Everything else are villages that are getting smaller and smaller. According to the latest census, so territorially, it's the 4th largest municipality in Montenegro out of our 23 municipalities, but actually it has just a bit more than 9,000 people all total. So it's very sparsely populated and it's very small. And so the whole thing about what was happening there is that the policy was saying, let's develop this. We already have some tourism, we have some tourists, let's make it even better, let's make more tourism accommodation, let's do this. And this, however, was just a justification to create a plan that is going to uphold a massive real estate development for which there is no basis, there is no need, it just kind of eats up the space and it fixates a huge amount of money in this very pristine natural environment and basically destroys it in the process, as you're going to see in the continuation. The plans, again, for this were made a long time ago. And the plans here were for the center of town were made in 2007, 2008, and it is amazing that at the time when they were made, these plans for central areas assumed that there is going to be way, way more built up than up to that point. So for example, in the very center of town, almost 7.5 times more than already exists is going to be built. And in these other parts, so in Smailagića Polja and in Breza, 22 times more and 28 times more. It is incredible that this is actually something. This also invites questions about the expertise of these experts. Like, how do you do this? And also, while it invites these questions, it also invites questions about the political mandate. Obviously, this was made because there was a political request to make this, but it is really, really overburdened and overutilized the area. That is planned to overutilize the area in the future. And then in 2014, when a spatial urban plan, which is a higher order plan, was made, and it included also experts that were not only from Montenegro, but from abroad, they actually said, this is incredible, we cannot do this, this is incredible, like this is such an overreach of use that this actually needs to be brought down at the detail level. However, these plans stayed in force, and they're still in force until this day. If you want to know how, just ask me later, again, if you're a legal nerd. I just don't want to overburden the presentation more right now. However, there was not a lot of construction during this period from 2008, 2009 until a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, what happened is the first portion of the first highway in Montenegro was opened, and this highway connected Podgorica and Kolašin. Podgorica, the capital, and Kolašin. So what used to be connected with a very wavy road along Morača River in very dangerous canyon now became a really easy trip, only like 25 minutes, and you're in Kolašin. So now you have better connectivity. And also, at the same time, you have a coast, Montenegrin coast, that's already overutilized and overbuilt. So there is some new space is needed to park all the cash, and there is a lot of cash just flowing around waiting to be parked into some real estate. Let's go to Kolašin. Other than this, infrastructural conditions and conditions of justifying the planning before, there was a third thing, which was economic citizenship program. So you maybe know that some other European countries utilize this as well. In Montenegro, this was in force for several years, 2018 to 2021, I think. But during this time, 2022, yeah, I wrote it down. So, how it looked like in Montenegro was that you can get a Montenegrin passport with this whole tale that Montenegro is going to enter EU soon, and then everything is going to be available for you anyway. And what you need to do is to invest. Now, it's also very narrative. It's a narrative trick, because usually when you talk about investing, people think, oh, you're producing new something. You're creating some opportunities for people to work. You're adding some value. Actually, no, you just need to invest in the real estate. And also, Montenegro made certain discrimination of prices, as we say in economics. So the policy said, if you want to invest on the coast or in Montenegrin capital, you need to invest 400,000 euros. But if you invest in the north, where Kolašin also is, you only need 250,000 euros. So then people were more interested in that, naturally, because it's much cheaper. And they're like, okay, what is there to buy for that price? And then building industry remembered, we have these amazing plans. We can build whatever we want. So they went to Kolašin, and they actually started building according to these plans and started producing huge, basically mushrooming. It's a metastasis of new, really thick urban fabric that again was just placed onto this space without actually properly equipping the space infrastructurally. So, before the next slide, I just want to draw your attention to this. So in this, certain projects had to be approved for economic citizenship. At the end of the economic citizenship, before it got closed, out of 12 listed projects, 7 were in Kolašin, and all of them were condo hotels. And again, Kolašin has less than 10,000 people. So you can see, how various, things came together to make this happen. And also, because the goal was for people to spend 250,000 euros, they made these tiny apartments, 30 square meters, and then sold them for these ridiculous prices. So now price of real estate in Colossian is absolutely ridiculous. And in some of these developments that are a bit more upscale, a bit more luxurious, you're expected to pay 10,000 euros per square meter, which is insane. So, and also it's very interesting that whole rationale, whole narrative behind the economic citizenship program was like, we're going to collect money for underdeveloped regions. But then funds to underdeveloped regions amounted to around 66 million euros, while at the same time, investors into these real estates, but not the investors who bought them, but the building companies that built them, got almost 200 million euros from this. Because this is a huge cash injection for the local building industry. And you also know how important in all of our economies building industries are. So basically, this is a snapshot of how the natural environment and urban fabric of Colossian was sacrificed. No need for it. Colossian now does not have more residents than it had before. None of these people live there. They don't do anything. These buildings are empty. But it was sacrificed to artificially create conditions where you're going to give this injection to real estate industry in Montenegro. It's incredible. This is just a little table. I have this written out in both English and Montenegrin. If anyone's interested in this, I can give you this. But it's just to show, you know, like the number of new jobs that was promised and the prices and the number of new rooms. So this is all exponential growth. But of course, after several years of these projects, no new jobs. Because this is just empty. Because these are condo hotels. They're not creating any new urbanity about them. It is just a place for people to park cash and then take their Montenegrin passports and go wherever they're normally going. This is about the bad condition of our infrastructure. So that's, this is what I wanted to say before. So as late as 2023, only 8.5% of apartments are actually connected to public sewage. Because we have not been investing. This is north of Montenegro is the region that's dying out. You know, after the breakup of Yugoslavia and after we destroyed the industry that existed there, people just are moving away. People don't live there anymore, and then there is no money to invest in infrastructure. And even with these new developments, infrastructure was not renewed. So actually, even after a couple of years, and this is just 2 years ago, now renewed data would be even more stark. Some of these projects are, even though they are built, they cannot be utilized, even if they wanted to be, because they are still without the access to basic things that they need. And in the end, some of these hotels are also like, because Colossian is mountain town, and then it is adjacent to ski slopes, and there used to be this plan that Colossian for the future is also going to be winter tourism resort and still do some tourism in the summer, and this is how we survive. But now with the climate change, the winters are shorter and shorter, and actually last couple of winters we basically had almost no snow days, which means that even the hotels built around ski slopes, even if there were infrastructural conditions to use them, you can't use them because people don't come there because there is no ski. There is no snow to ski. And once again, to go through our, legitimate, legal, inevitable. So legitimate, the whole narrative was again new jobs, to revive the north, highways finally going to pay off because of all of these people are coming, international hotel brands is going to be amazing. And then we got the plans that are still in use. We got these projects for citizenship scheme, and we had these permits that were really easy to get because everyone wants to have good business climate and wants to kind of do not scare off the investors. And in the end, when people started seeing and when we started talking about how this is actually not good for the town and how this in no way contributes to life on a local level or for potential good future for town, everyone was like, oh, you're just haters. You're just against development. And you understand this kočničari razvoja, like you put the brakes on development, and you're just evil and you're just jealous. And yeah, you get completely unfounded responses to your. So, and we got engaged, we tried to create a debate about this in Colossian. So there is, the core of this initiative is just 6 of us. Out of 6 of us, 2 of us live in Colossian because there are no jobs. Like if you don't work in the municipality or you don't work in one of 2 hotels that are still like operational throughout the year, you don't really have anywhere to work. But our families still live there, and when you have expertise about this, then you really feel the need to say something about it. So we produced some books and we produced some analysis, and we actually try to engage more people, because there's still this idea that if something is getting built, that's good. Like something getting built, that means something's moving, that means it's going to pay off at some point. But that's not the truth. And this is also, these examples show that there is the big mismatch between what is actually needed for good life and what is actually how the resources are getting spent and how the space is getting spent. We are having this conversation, but we haven't really managed to do much. The initiative has, for now, we have one small victory, which is to actually protect the city center and to just put the detailed urban plan for the city center, to put it out of force and try to figure out other way. But still, this is again, this just threatens to conserve the, 2 main squares and the promenade with what is happening elsewhere. And also, even if this whole process stopped tomorrow, it does not in any way solve any sort of long-term projects of how do these small places survive in the future? And do we just abandon them? And then, and we cannot just abandon them because there are still people there and they still need the infrastructure and they still need to have a fruitful and productive lives. But this is then illustrative not only of this one small example, but of just many, many small places that are, as one of my colleagues says, becoming undefended territories for these predatory practices of international capital, and for various other nefarious ways in which our governments are ready to sacrifice certain zones in order to kind of progress with their economic and political goals that do not have the interests of the population at heart. This is just to show you what this looks like, one of these examples. So this used to be urban fabric before, and now this is where another little house was. And then they tore down the house and they built this. And of course, everything underneath the gray roof is illegal, of course. They just made like a false roof and then packed more apartments underneath. So, and we, of course, complained about this and sent to inspection and everything, but they were just like, yeah, what you're gonna do, it's built now. So yeah, it's a never ending. So, we have still a couple of things to maybe last 5 minutes to conclude a little bit and to go back to some of the instruments that we saw and to kind of just draw conclusions from these cases. So what are the instruments that planning uses? As we can see, rezoning, density increasing without benefits for the public. Rezoning meaning like something was used for certain thing before, now it's for something else, its value is much bigger, but most of this value goes to the private developer and the public just loses it. Special investment zones or exemption from taxes and fees, concessions, sellings and long leases of public assets. All of these are instruments through which we as public and as society get poorer and lots of money gets pushed towards private pockets. Administrative techniques, as we saw in case of sewage, these fragmented environmental impact assessments, fragmented building permits, where you're just pretending that this is all not part of the same ecosystem, where it obviously is. Expert reports commissioned by investors, where investors are going to regulate themselves. They're never going to regulate themselves. We need public institutions that are doing this, and we need to kind of keep watch over them, otherwise they're going to, again, work for private interest. And in the end, fiscal drivers, which is like how the money that our municipalities need is tied up in all of these processes, where the city says, I hear you, you're right, but we need money. And how are we going to get money if we don't get it through these projects where we increase the value of the land through a plan, and then someone needs to pay for certain taxes in order to use it. So this is again the whole system pretending like, again, economics and current economic system is gravity. It's not. Like, this can be organized differently. It's just that nobody is working on organizing it differently. This is again why to make any sort of headway in all this, we need progressive law people and progressive economists. So if you know any, you know, make them fall in love with you or something, you know, like bring them to the struggle. So in practice, we see how this, you know, land is portrayed as unused. It's not green, it's not ecosystem, it's not important, it's unused, let's use it. Then let's do some public works there in order to kind of, you know, like make it more attractive for the future. Let's activate this heritage, let's activate this resource. This is what we see in this like legitimizing part. And then in legal part, we see that plans change overnight without proper involvement of the public, or we see that plans stay in force like zombies forever. Or there are special purpose plans and laws, there are promises to investors that are not known to us until they're fulfilled down the line, etc., etc. And in the end, inevitable, when we get threatened that investors are going to leave, that we already have spent so much, you know, sunk cost fallacy, like we spent so much already, we're never going to recuperate it. If we don't do this now, we're losing everything. So again, another way in which we are being kept in a position where we can't even fathom that something can be done differently. And so basically, and this is very important also because we live this post-political existence, and this is also, I mean, it's a bit different in Slovenia, but most of the world today, and most of the Western world, there is basically this, it's very much alive, still this understanding that neoliberal economic system has no alternative. Nothing else has ever worked, nothing else will ever work, and basically we shouldn't even try because this is how things are. But the big truth there is that capitalism doesn't work. It's constantly crashing, we're constantly in crisis, we constantly don't have what we need, and it's just being, again, held up in life as some propped up, again, as some sort of a monster that we still can't find ways to actually defeat. So all of this can be rethought. It's just that through these narratives we are kept as, no, don't be unreasonable, where we absolutely should be unreasonable in face of this system. I'm almost done. This is just a small, like, you can see from this that I'm not actually an architect. Like, I can't make nice graphics, I can't to save my life. But this is just a very small scheme to keep in mind when we think about political economy of planning, how it materializes. So we have these actors, and these are by no means all of them, but they're the most important. State, multi-level, this means we have local municipalities, we have the state government, etc., regional governments. We have developers, we have political parties, we have communities, landowners, consultant financiers. We have many, many people in this who are part of this process. And they're motivated by various incentives. Some of them want to have revenue, like local municipalities. Some of them want votes, like political parties, and also politicians at various levels. They want to facilitate the capital valorization. There is money floating around, and we need to put it to some use. And then, through these channels, through certain laws, spatial plans, contracts, permits, narratives, they create what ends up, in most cases today within this system, as private capture of public value, as we saw in all of these cases, as socialized risks, like I, the investor, leave with a bag of money and you're left to kind of pick up the pieces, and uneven development. Because even though with all the talk of sustainable development and good spatial development and ecological development for decades now, we're nowhere near. And we always have regions that are struggling, and we always have these overheating parts of the economy, and we always have problems and bubbles bursting up all over the system. So it's important to know, and it's important also to know that all of these are interconnected. And there is nothing in this whole system that is neutral, that is somehow pure. It needs to be kind of mapped and perceived clearly and criticized. So if there are if you want to get involved into this more and you forget everything I said tonight, I would like you to remember these things. Because if you want to start watching what's happening with spatial planning and you feel overwhelmed, you should absolutely go to EPOP if you're here. But then, even if you want within your own action or your own neighborhood council or whatever, you should watch what's happening with spatial plans that are relevant for your area, your community, your town, and you should watch for these red flags. So, late stage plan amendments with little publicity. So when there is a plan and there is a little, they're changing a little bit of something and there is an expedited procedure. Expedited procedure means they're cooking something up and they don't want us to know. So go and get involved. So for example, it's very interesting now, whoever is watching, I don't know if there is anyone from Croatia here tonight, but if you have been maybe following the whole saga about the new law on spatial planning in Croatia, they have done everything they can to actually do this without giving the citizens and the experts opportunity to participate. And I just saw a couple of days ago that even though they condensed the debate to only 15 days, there were 490 comments that were sent because people saw that this is going to be a problem and they actually really got engaged and they did not let it just slide without a big mess. So we're still going to see how this works out in the end, but actually the public and the expertise really, and counter expertise really got activated. Upzoning without clear benefit for the public. Like when they say, we're going to now allow for this parcel here to be built up higher. A question is why? Why? Investor requested it. I don't care. What's in it for me? So then investor basically has to kind of, if the argument can be made that if we allow investor to make something bigger there needs to be a substantial win for the public interest. So, and this is something that should just be expected from people who are making a lot of money from these processes. Any sort of proposition for long concessions for waterfronts, forests, public lands, like it happened, there was an attempt to do that in Muzil, in Pula. That was actually done for Mamula and Sveti Stefan in Montenegro. That happens all over the place, sometimes for the extraction of forests, sometimes for the use for building these resorts or extracting the value from the beautiful landscape. But every time when there is an idea for this, as a rule, public loses. Because over these long periods of time, they keep the resource and use it, while they just, as time goes on, pay less and less, or can, just any sort of negative externality can just be pushed to the public, and public is left to deal with it. So this is something that should be opposed, or actually should be really, really closely scrutinized. And when they need to explain why they're doing what they're doing, there is always less room to wiggle and do something wrong, or something that is actually detrimental to public interest. And in the end, public-private partnerships, which is now in the literature everywhere recognized as a tool that is really used blatantly to privilege private interest over public. And then it's if you just want to kind of, if you have 1 hour and you want to know what's going to happen with this new plan or this new law, these are good questions to ask. Like, what changed in land use? Don't read 200 pages of a plan. Go and look for land use within a plan and see what changed there and try to map that out. Then, what obligations does the public take for the new development? What is expected from the public to pay for, and what is the opportunity, what is promised by the investor? And what are the guarantees that the investor is giving? What is the environmental baseline, and who defines the mitigation? Because they often say, oh, we might cut some trees here, but we're going to put them somewhere else. What? How? Who is going to control that? Who is going to make sure this? What are the reports that you have to submit? Who is going to make sure these reports are submitted? So all of this just kind of, and a lot of times when you try to do this, you actually see that there is no control. Like in the case of Zabilo Ljubović, they just, when you point to mistakes, they say, oh, we didn't know, we are understaffed, we don't have enough people monitoring this. This cannot be the case. And if we insist And again, when you ask about this, doesn't matter who is in the municipal office, what party is in power. You are always right when you ask about these things, because this is some of the baselines of public interest. And if they cannot respond truthfully and sufficiently to these questions, they have not taken enough precaution to actually guard public interest in spatial development. And also how open and accessible was participation. Expedited procedure, why? Why is it expedited? Is somebody's life in danger? No, somebody's profit is in danger. So like it's again, you know, like, and it's always a good thing to kind of argue against expedited procedures in any sort of law. Usually laws on spatial planning, on strategic investment, on golf in Croatia years ago, always kind of assumes there's going to be expedited procedure because we don't want business barriers. No, we need to be careful and we need to take it slowly in order to make sure that we don't make mistakes. Because when these kind of mistakes are made, they cannot be unmade. I promise this is like last slide. Yes, so and we talked about through these cases we talked about resistance strategies and what people have been doing in order to fight this. But if we sum them up, I think this is my offering of summing it up. So having knowledge, and this is why anyone who knows anything from any of the fields that we kind of even briefly mentioned tonight should find a way how to get engaged with this. So it's counter mapping is a cool word, like, you know, combinational word, but it actually can be just when the plan explicitly says this has no value, or this is underused, or this is something that should be activated. Just to show what already exists there is an amazing act of activism. To just show that, for example, in Srđ there are hundreds of plants living, that in Velika Plaža in Montenegro there are hundreds of species of birds. So you kind of give the counter argument that it's not true, that it is empty or underused. There are things happening there and they are important. Doing our own environmental impact assessments, this is difficult because it requires a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of expertise. But we can at least look at the baselines. And there are always people who are also in the independent scene, who are doing some sort of this work in the cultural scene, who can help with this, at least in some part. Budget forensics, this is amazing. Like I know how we all love to work with the budgets. But anyway, it's actually super interesting to look at municipal budgets and what money is spent where. And actually, again, if you have friendly economists in all of these movements, we really crave more economists. So just tell them not to be evil. And, you know, like start kind of joining the, I'm joking, of course, but no, it would be, and of course, as a career for an economist, it's probably more lucrative to go into finances than to go into this. But there is a lot of like good labor to be done on the side of the movements as well. Plan analysis, urbanists and architects, thank you for your service and please do more of it. And requesting public access to information. I have to say that the fact that in Montenegro we have now guaranteed that they have to respond to us in 2 weeks when we ask for public right to information, it has been a game changer. Because they actually have to do it because European Union accession process is making them do it. So it's amazing. You can find out things. Then institutional, have people who are going to go to hearings, who are going to go and give comments, organize referendums if it's possible, strategic litigation, again. Extra-institutional, direct action, media campaigns, cultural events, this is where arts and all of artsy stuff come in, protests, performances, very important to have in the mix. Political, if you can run for office, run for office. If you can make a political party, the best time was 10 years ago, the second best time is now, please go do it. Because we need more people on the left to kind of understand all this and create different programs for it. And the collective approach to kind of see, okay, if we don't want these things to be run by these people, how can we run them differently? And I think also already there are so many good examples just from my very superficial knowledge, but I know that there are many good examples in Ljubljana and in Slovenia in general about cooperatives and about collectively run spaces and many proofs of concepts that things can be run differently and can be run really well. I already talked about all of these at length. So yeah, it's just like small lessons maybe in one sentence from all of these cases. But yes, it all is actually about how different tactics are mixing. and how not one thing is going to solve any of this. And in the end, after all of these, like big story that's running now a bit more than 1 hour, it is obvious that first of all, everything can be fought, all of these big projects and all of these big schemes, and that all of it requires a lot of communication, a lot of strategizing, and a lot of different knowledges. And of course, like we could spend another 3 days parsing each of these apart and talking about all the conflicts and all the things that had to be negotiated and how people made it happen. But in the end, this mix is what keeps the action alive, and actually constantly shows that doing things differently is possible, and that fighting these sorts of development is possible and will yield results if we keep at it. It's just very complex, but I think also rewarding. My final really thing is to say that these key takeaways would be that to remember that planning is a value allocation machine. It's not neutral. So every time when it changes, it is changing because it is producing value to someone. Our goal should be to capture that value for public good, not to just let it be. Extraction travels through technicalities such as plans and permits and contracts, so this should be paid particularly close attention. Dispossession is framed as common sense. And so we must actually say that this framing is problematic. Dispossession meaning like all of these privatizations, all of these upzonings where, like we're pushed away, where some privileged interests are being framed as dominant. This is not something that is just naturally good to happen in a city. And we have now decades to show that this is not producing good living environments. So there should be just more open contestation of this framework. And resistance needs multi-sided strategies and patient coalition and institution building, which is like more elegantly said what I said before. That would be it. Thank you so much for your attention and sorry for going over time.
Zdaj pa čas za vprašanje. In English, please. And I will give everybody this for filming purposes, so that also people who will listen later can hear you. Yeah, Barbara?
Thank you, Sonja. Very interesting. I have just one question, because at the beginning you mentioned Musil in Pula, and
yes.
I don't know what happened there, so could you elaborate
yeah,
a bit more?
I have like, the thing is, in this presentation, I have like 6 more slides about that, but I wanted to include Podgorica, so I sacrificed Musil, but I'm going to like tell you sort of fast about that. So, you know that Musil is a peninsula close to Pula, and it is part of this wider area of Brijuni. And it was, for most of its history, it was actually used by military. So it was closed off from the rest of the community. And then people who would be involved with military or engaged in military would spend time there and be there, but the wider community just did not have like this emotional relationship with that space, did not really know that space. So like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when the formerly military land all over Croatia started going into the civil ownership, this idea started that Musil should be used together with the rest of Brijuni archipelago to create something called Brijuni Riviera. Which is like a big tourism project, and it would be something where then they started immediately making plans with like thousands of hotel rooms, and of course all of these same narratives, how this is going to, we are using underutilized spaces, we're creating new jobs, we're creating new branding for Croatian Riviera, this is amazing. And basically it's a very interesting case also because the first plan that they attempted to do for Musil, and it's a big peninsula, like if you look at the map, if you don't know it, you probably know it if you live here, but if you don't know it, then you can see that basically the Musil is as big as a Pula city center. Like it really is an amazing space that could be used for all sorts of purposes in the future. And also, if we think about how our cities will probably need to grow in the future as well, and need to grow together with the community and with functions that the society needs, it is very, very short-sighted to just give all of it to one function, which would be tourism. And of course, they also were promoting golf on Muzil. Golf and hotels, of course. So, and in one, at the time, they were, of course, there was a lot of organizing happening during this time. And if you know, especially if you're architects or if you're interested in this history at all, you probably know about Pula Group, Pulska Grupa. They have made a lot of, and it's also easy to find online, a lot of their writings about the case, and they have been very active there, group of architects who were problematizing this entire approach. But also people from DINÂMIA'CET-Iscte, Ecological Association, they were all together making this, all sorts of instruments they were using in order to try to convince and change this policy. One of the very interesting instruments that can also still be found online is Muzil Starter, where they were actually collaborating with the community to kind of try to persuade the authorities that they should slowly open up former military buildings that were still quite stable, could be used, and actually make them into some sort of community spaces where people can use them and kind of create some sort of workshops there and just use them for anything, because the collective intelligence of the community is just much more interesting than something that monofunction of tourism can produce here. And for me, so it was also very interesting to see from one of the workshops made about this back in the day, like more than almost 15 years ago, where people would come in a space like this and would be asked, what would you like to have in this space? And they would say, oh, it would be nice to have gardens, it would be nice to have housing, it would be nice to have cultural spaces, also even maybe new university, And the people who were leading this workshop would say, that's great, and there is enough space there for all of that, so we can have all of that, or we can have golf course. What should we have, So the point is that they tried to make the first spatial urban plan without even engaging with the space. They weren't even allowed to go. The planners were not allowed to go into the space because it was still held by military. It was still considered military grounds. And they made a plan anyway and proposed the golf course and the hotels. And then later on, of course, there was the activists did their own counter mapping and did their own propositions. And even though the institutions, the official institutions, kept promoting the project and even offered Muzil to be rented out, basically in a concession for 66 years, this did not go as planned. They did not manage to actually go through with this. They didn't manage to find a good enough proposal, whatever. So anyway, the bottom line is that at that time, the project did not go forward. However, in the official plans for the Pula Bay, Muzil is still being classified as is classified for tourism. So which means that especially with this new push now, with the new law for planning and with the probably like new pressures to create, more luxury developments on the Croatian coast, some of these empty, as they're codified, empty. Some of these areas that have not been built up until now are probably going to be under pressure again. So it's interesting to look at that space and see what's happening, but it's also very interesting to know that so much organizing has happened over the last 15 years and to see, where the next organizing goes from there, because all of these initiatives have produced so many good tools, so much knowledge, so just like have done so much. And it's very also interesting for us who continue to struggle for these things in our own environments to learn from them. So a lot of that is available. Some of it is even in English, and if you can read Croatian, even better. So yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you. Vprašanje?
Do you maybe know something about the Daila case also on the Istrian coast? Are there the same investors because they want to build port there, but I think there's some local initiative. I don't know a lot about it, so if anybody else knows, or you maybe.
The latest that I've really read up about related to Pula is there is a lot of now conversation about the ways in which the institutions are actually working towards privatization of beaches and how people are resisting that, and also the whole initiative to save Lungomare, which is a promenade. So another referendum was organized there a couple of years ago, also in an attempt to kind of stop this project. So some of the tactics that have been developed before are now being kind of taken further, and absolutely all of these things that have happened over the last 15 years have, I think, in the broader public or publics, politicized the issue of spatial planning. About that particular project, I don't know the details, especially don't know them by heart, but I wouldn't be surprised. I know that in the area of, Katarina Monumenti, in the area of that whole, bay, several new ports have been constructed, and there are plans for more, but there is always this issue of, how to mount the resistance, and also like who is going to participate, and also after such long years of trying to prove these things and win public support for a different model of spatial development, sometimes it's also difficult to just keep the engines running. This is also why the institutionalization is important, to kind of always have activists in the field. That's great, but the resources have to come from somewhere. Political articulation has to come from somewhere. When I talked with some people who were involved in Pula struggles before and then entered the politics after that and became started working through Možemo, they were also telling me that they were quite exhausted with the activist experience, and that they actually feel that as politicians they have a broader audience and they can do more, also because they have just more public resources. Because if you're an activist association, like you have to write a project, maybe you get the funding, maybe you don't, and funding is small, and you have to jump through many hoops in order to make your work possible. Whereas where you are a political party, basically by law you get certain resources every year, and then this is something that you can use for things like this, because leftist and green politics is made from these movements and with these considerations. So it's, but yeah, after that also is the problem. Like the pressure has been big, and the pressure is going to increase. Because people on the other side have a lot of money, a lot of connections, a lot of power. And what normally people on the other side, people in these examples, and I count myself as one of them, we just have a deep appreciation of the land and the idea that it should serve as, not serve, but be part of the system where we live together with other living creatures. So it's, and what you can mount with this, what can you do with this, with the spotty budgets and difficult communications and people that you constantly need to work with. It's a tricky work, but it's the only way in which any of these initiatives also made any progress here or anywhere else in the world, for that matter. There is no like a magic. There is no magic approach, but there are some things that we know from experience that can be done and can help.
I have a question before I give the word to the rest.
You're abusing your mother.
I'm abusing my position, but just came to my mind. Now, you mentioned several times that lots of these movements later formed political parties. And now these political parties are mostly green left.
Yeah.
And what is very often now used as an argument against these kind of struggles is that this is like some extreme movements of the extreme left, radical left, like militant, and basically this is just politicizing the issues which are like at stake. So how do you respond to this, or what are the known responses to this?
Yes, so it's issues should absolutely be politicized, but it is interesting, I think, and it's interesting for me to look at this as someone who now for several years has been living in Lisbon, and in Portugal we not only have like one left-wing party, we have several left-wing parties, and some of them are leftier than the others, and they don't always agree, and sometimes they're in coalitions and sometimes they're not, but. We have been, I think in post-Yugoslav space, we have been for so long without actual progressive representation in our parliaments, without actually having like the most progressive that we had was some sort of social democrat something, and usually they were also just promoting neoliberal policies. So now we're kind of learning again to get organized around things like actually common wealth, common good, things that are good for all of us. We're just learning to organize around this, and still we are at the point where saying something like, our rivers should not be used to cool off AI servers for Silicon Valley. And that can be understood as a very, very progressive proposition. But I think it soon will not be. Because if more and more people kind of gather around it, the more people gathers around it, the less threatening it sounds. And that it only also is understood as radical while it's still small. But I think as bigger groups of people get politicized because of all these pressures, it is going to become understood as something that's less radical. I have another maybe interesting anecdote for that. So I always I try not to get annoyed, but in Podgorica I regularly get annoyed when we talk about housing, which is now also getting ridiculously expensive in Podgorica. And we talk about how housing should, like me and my colleagues, and like in gatherings such as this, we talk about be a commodity. The housing should be right, and we should find a system and how to make a system where everyone has housing and nobody has to pay for it or nobody has to go bankrupt for it. And then people on the other side are like, but no, that's blasphemous. You have to buy your apartment. You have to like pay for your apartment like all your life. This is how things are done. And I'm like, do you remember that for the definitely better part of 20th century, we lived in Yugoslavia? And we had many other ways of actually creating housing. Was it perfect? It wasn't. Was it absolutely available to everyone? It wasn't. But was it much more humane than it is now? Yes, it was. And did we produce some amazing things that we still use our societies up to this point? We did. So basically, not having a memory of previous ways of being and previous ways of organizing in society is also to a detriment to us, I think. And I think also that the fact that many of the people whom I mentioned here today as well draw parallels between progressive tendencies in the previous forms in which our societies were, like not saying this was perfect, but there were some things there that we could maybe rework and use still today to create better societies. So, and to finally like wrap it up around that is also, I think it's another scare tactic. It's a scare tactic. It's like, do not organize as a political, just like they say, do not make a syndicate. Do not unionize, because if you unionize, we're going to like look at you weird. We're going to be very offended as your employers. Be offended and go on your merry way. We're going to actually form around class solidarity, and then we're going to come to you with our set of requests. And then you do with it as you please. Yeah, you need to be a bit, yeah.
Yeah, Zala from Prostorož. Sonja, thank you for the fantastic lecture. I really, really enjoyed it.
Thanks to Prostorož for being here. I'm a huge fan for years. Thanks so much.
I wanted to ask two things. First one is maybe more pragmatic. How do you choose your battles? I suspect that there are many in Montenegro and elsewhere in Lisbon, etc. And the second one is, I think Montenegro and Slovenia have a lot to compare because of this like a small town vibe. Uh-huh. How do you specifically organize in Kolašin where everyone knows each other?
Absolutely, right? Yeah. That's so. So I have a couple of anecdotes, and I'm reaching for this because it's a part of the anecdote. Yeah. So I have to show you this. So it says, it says uz pomoć štapa, kanapa I inata, which is out of thin air and sheer stubbornness, and so it's one of the ways in which to do this, and of course it's a big topic of how difficult it is to do this work, because it's not like you have one job, you have several jobs, and you're constantly in communication with people, and also like, Eva Čukić from Ministarstvo prostora once said very memorably, like, you're either like working with people or you're not. You cannot just double there something and then disappear, because people start relying on you and they need you. So in my concrete case, internet is amazing. It's really amazing that we have internet, and I hope whatever is the new social form that we come up in the future, we keep the internet. because then you can, nothing's guaranteed, but it's really great to have internet, and it's really great to be able to communicate over long distances. And it's just these last couple of days, just to kind of think through your question. I have probably received messages or emails from 5 different initiatives in Montenegro needing something. Like one public debate is in session. There needs to be, someone wants information about some sort of cultural protection, something. There is right now, tonight, there is a protest in Budva and actually there are people from Slovenia there. Because it's about Slovenska plaža. Janez Kobe, he won a Borba Award in the 80s for that project. And now, of course, we have some wonderful investors who are saying, like, let's just tore it down, we're going to build something prettier. And the community in Budva is, of course, saying, hell you won't. So tonight we have a protest there, and my colleague from Kana organization has also given a speech. And also people from Slovenia actually went to participate, and people, from what I gathered while I was on my way here, and they were sending messages, actually also artists whose art is housed in Slovenska plaža also went to Montenegro to give speeches. And I think the late architect Kobe has descendants who hold the authorship rights. So for this reason, also some of Slovenian institutions have submitted the letters to Montenegro government saying, don't do this. So this is part, so we were organizing this because people there were writing to me, and then I was like collecting them with other people from Montenegro, because our little initiative, Kana Kokon Architect, is not formalized in a way where we have people sitting in offices. It is also good if you can manage to have people sitting in offices. I think this is great. It creates other pressures because you have to be constantly seeking funding. We wanted to keep like guerrilla feel, but not because like, oh, we want to be, but because we were just really afraid to kind of tie our livelihoods to the availability of grant money. And then we decided, okay, I'm going to pursue my doctorate. My colleagues are going to work in different, like Ružica works in a high school, Jelena and Milica have different jobs. All 3 of them are architects, and I'm an urbanist with a background in economics. So, and then our work is really, really always, it's very fluid, because all of us get different requests and different information from people, and then we have one group where we constantly talk to each other and we sort of delegate on the spot. And then I was like, okay, today and tomorrow I have to be focusing on Ljubljana. So hold the fort and tell everyone I'll come back to them on Monday. But then and then next week when I'm back at my workstation, I'll just be working on that more. And usually my working day, at least like 1 hour is devoted to that, and then like other hours that I work are something for, and then more on the weekends and more in the evenings. So it's I think tiring, but I also think it's very rewarding, because why do I know all of these things if I can't do anything, or at least push some things forward? Also because, and this is why I also show you the bag. This bag was made for me because a girl in Podgorica who has production of these bags heard me say this in a speech, because someone was asking me, how does your organization do what you do? And I said, well, pomoću štapa, kanapa i nata. And she was like, that's amazing, can I put that on the bag for you? And so this is like a very, very nice gesture, and it's just this kind of recognition and appreciation. This is something where you're like, okay, so this is important to these people, and I can still afford to, use my time and energy, whatever, in this way, and maybe down the line, our organization transforms into something else. Or if it will be even better to give rise to other people, because we're constantly asking other people to step in, or like giving them, and this is also how in Kolashin, and the second part of your question, it is definitely more difficult because you know everyone, but it's also in some senses easier because you know everyone, so they cannot kind of just come to you and say like, oh, you're kočničarka razvoja. And I'm like, please, I've known you since kindergarten. Let's talk frankly, like what's happening here. So but one wall that we have been like hitting is this really crisis of imagination and the crisis of just of knowledge, because it's not only in Kolashin, it's not only in one spot. It is just that our thinking in terms of economic possibility has been so starved by neoliberal dogma that nobody even dares to think about something else. Like, we do not have, right now in Montenegro, there is no political option that could come up with something else for the development that would not be just jeopardizing space in the way in which we saw in Podgorica and Kolašin and other examples. It's just, they couldn't come up with anything else. And there are other ways. Now, for example, you probably all know about Zoran Mamdani winning the election in New York. And he was saying things that make sense. And also there's money in the budget to do these things. And it's going to be very interesting to see, how that falls into place. So that might be like a new motivation also for more progressive people all over the world to kind of try to make new policies, try to make new. But for now, the thing is, I go to Kolašin and I talk to some of the officials, me and my colleagues from the group, and we say we don't want Kolašin to be Budvanized. Because it's Budvanizacija is an actual term. It's it's a scary word because it really is destroyed. And then, they say well, maybe a tiny bit Budvanized because Budva has a bit more money. So can we maybe Budvanize it? But the whole thing saying how about we actually take stock of what people are doing? How do you support agricultural producers that are still there? Or if you want to have some tourism in this nature, how do we make it be something that really adds high value while people come and enjoy the nature? We can most definitely come up with better models. It's just more work and it's more communication with people, but why not? So I think that we will need to see how new generation grows into these roles and maybe just gets inspired a bit more with something that's not just, really, really poor political choices we had in the past that were always relying on nationalism and on, the recent past that has been so painful for all of us in former Yugoslavia, I think. I don't know if I responded, I tried. Yeah.
More questions? We have time for maybe 2 more.
Hi, thanks for coming. Okay, I also have 2 questions. One is, how do you get people to mobilize? Just the general public. How to get them more interested, not 2.5% of participation.
Yeah.
That's the first question. And the second question is, what's happening with the I don't know what it's called, the Revolution Museum or what in Kolašin.
Yeah, that's also Slovenian work.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I love that building. I love that building. That's such a weird building. It's amazing. So, but no, but it's great because it was always this kind of a big reference point for all of us, growing up there. But so my experience is that when something happens, so it doesn't really work to shame people into participation. They're not going to do that. But when they feel that something's wrong, people start organizing. And then sometimes so in my experience, sometimes there is a moment where people can either jump into organizing better or get completely disillusioned and not talk to anyone about it ever again. And this is where it's important to kind of. So this is where public outreach or public presence of the organizers is important. Because it did happen to us multiple times that people wrote to us because they heard us talk on the news or saw in a newspaper, or they see repeatedly that we're on social media, and then they say, I think something weird is happening in my neighborhood, and could you look into that? And then for us, that's a good opening, and then we're okay, we're gonna help you, but you need to pick up the tools as well, because we can't, this is unpaid work and it's good, we're not complaining, but it's just be aware that we also have day jobs and we need to make a living and So through this, we're gonna help you, and you're also gonna learn, and you're gonna talk with your neighbors, and then we do it together. And if they kind of bite, then it goes on as a, and it's also, it did happen to us before that we get to a certain stage and then people get a bit of cold feet because they need to go and speak with someone at the municipality and they feel like they can't really defend their position well. So this is also where it's important to get good primers. You give them the materials. This is what you can do. And then if they ask you something complicated, you tell them to call us and we'll explain. So it's, and sometimes if it's something that, my experience is also that people like to feel like they're part of something a little bit, maybe guerrilla. they're like, oh yes, we're doing this together. You know, also because I think we suffer from not having these forms of community where we can explore things together or try to find something wrong in the plans or in the budget. Like people like that there is like a fun aspect to it. So of course, you know, when you are tired and have many deadlines, like it's difficult to kind of keep this up. But it's these are the things that work. And the power of inat in Montenegro is really, I think in the Balkans in general, it's like when people are really, really stubborn, we're like, no, this is important to me, I'm not gonna. So this is also why sometimes it's through this, sometimes even professionals can be politicized to participate. We would always need, like, experts alone can't solve anything, but experts are very important to be parts of this and to kind of be able to communicate well and to kind of be available. So it has, I think, many moving parts, but just the sheer amount of requests that we're getting from people right now is somehow keeping me optimistic. And I think one of the reasons for that is also that we had these big protests against the investment of Eagle Hills, which is this firm that comes from United Arab Emirates. So there was like a big action in March, not in March, in April and in May in Montenegro against this company basically being given Velika Plaža in Ulcinj for their new Dubai or whatever other nonsense. So then people were kind of really eager to express that they're not happy with this, and I think we still feel some ripple effect from that people are being more attuned to what's happening with their spaces. So that's also, but this is also in the big ecology of these movements, you know, like what are the big influences that can politicize the public? I always think back to Varšavska in Zagreb and how that was the big thing that happened from which like many of the other movements learned a lot, and how publics in Croatia also became politicized after that, related to issues of space. Yeah, and about Pom and Dom, unfortunately, it's not being well taken care of. But they are doing some renovation, but I don't think it's in accordance with the original project, and I think the author is not happy, understandably so, but it's still there. And I actually remember that one of our first theater play productions when I was in high school, we actually had there. And later it started, like rain started falling in, and we had to move it into like a more like, yeah, but it's a beautiful building. I'm very grateful to the systems that were in place in Yugoslavia so we could have that in Montenegro. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have to finish now, unless there's some very pressing
7 more
questions.
minutes. It's like 2 hour event. 7 more minutes, yeah.
So, yeah. Any very interesting question left? Okay, sorry, I was pushing a little bit to finish this. Yeah, but
yeah, you wanted to say something.
There will be more. Huh?
No,
there will be more opportunities for
the photo. Yeah, like it's a beautiful photo. I want to have it. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much to everybody for coming, and hvala da ste prišli in hvala za vsa vprašanja in sodelovanje.
It was amazing to have you here tonight. Thank you so much, and I hope it was interesting. And you know, like, yeah, this is my Instagram and this is my email. And if you want to ever get in touch, please do. And if you come to Lisbon, also get in touch, and we can go for coffee. I can show you some nice, you know, community projects. Yeah. And that's
hvala še enkrat. Hvala, Sonja.